Typically when we think about things going wrong in boating, we think about things that can go wrong on the water, but that's not always the case. Things can go wrong a little bit of anywhere. Welcome back, guys. It is your boy Broncos Guru, and it's this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first incident to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to New Zealand to an incident that absolutely blows my mind. How these kinds of things happen, I just don't understand them. But this is an actual 911 call from a vessel in distress where nobody was able to grab a life jacket.
This is the police. Where is your emergency?
Our boat got sink at Kaioa.
To where, sorry?
Kaioa.
Is your boat sinking, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Kaioa. Oh, yep, okay, I
We're
can
going
see
to lost
that.
the phone. We're going to lost the phone. Can you help me out, please?
That's what I'm trying to do now, okay?
You don't have any life jacket. We're hanging on to the cushion.
Okay, alright. Do you know how far off the coast? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Anyone there?
Fortunately, this emergency operator was vaguely able to make out the area they were in, and they did scramble an emergency helicopter to come try and find these people. Fortunately, they arrived at the location, but the vessel was not where it was last reported. They followed the wind and currents and actually found these 4 people just a little bit away from where the vessel had sank. When they arrived, none of these 4 people, exactly as they described, had life jackets on. They were hanging on to a few floating cushions. Fortunately, the helicopter had a rescue swimmer on board who they deployed into the water. He had several flotation devices with him when he landed in the water, but he only had 3, and there were 4 people who had been treading water for quite some time. The rescue swimmer, realizing the 4th person is in distress, takes off his own personal flotation device and gives it to this swimmer, putting his own life at risk to try and save these people. These are 4 of the luckiest boaters I've ever seen. To be out of the water like this, you've got to have life jackets on board, and you've got to have quick and easy access to them. All 4 of these boaters wind up being rescued and survive, but I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for the quick actions of the New Zealand police and the New Zealand Coast Guard, this story would have had a much different ending. Way to go, guys. And if you thought our first story was wild, things only get crazier from here, as our second story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Sydney, Australia, where a woman has narrowly escaped her car after crashing into Sydney's Hawkesbury River over the past weekend. Fortunately for the driver, Jonathan Cooper and his friends were in a nearby boat and wound up rushing to her aid. The driver, as they approach, communicates to the group that she needs an ambulance and believes that she's injured, even though the group tries to urge her out of the car to come towards the boat. The driver of the vehicle will later tell news sources that the reason she didn't want to leave the vehicle, she was unsure that she could swim with her current injuries. After a little convincing from Jonathan and crew, they do eventually convince the woman that she needs to leave the vehicle. But look at this timing. They can't time this any better. As she starts to get out of the car finally, the car starts to go under into the river. I mean, the driver of this vehicle was literally just seconds away from possibly being sucked down with the rest of this car, because as you can tell, once it started to go down, this vehicle went down fast. The driver of the vehicle was airlifted out of the area and did wind up suffering a fractured leg. It's actually believed the cause of this crash was a medical episode the driver may have had during the process of driving that made her run off the road. Speaking of random things sinking that aren't boats, well, let's go ahead and stay there for our next news story to make the boating news, as we're going to witness something else floating away. 2 men were having a great chilling session over some beers on a makeshift mattress when all of a sudden winds and currents wind up sweeping them a little bit further off the coast than they anticipated going. After being out on this makeshift mattress for 3 or 4 hours where they only anticipated going about 50 yards off the coast, they wound up drifting almost 2 miles offshore, off the coast of Western Australia. At first, what was all fun and games quickly turned into a little bit more dangerous scene once the 2 realized the mattress was full of pinholes and was actually sinking. Fortunately for this crew, they were able to reach one of their friends by cell phone who happened to be out on a jet ski and came to 2 miles offshore to rescue this crew. Our next incident to make the boating news this week is going to be the Atlantic Destiny fishing vessel, where about 130 miles off the coast of Nova Scotia caught on fire, lost power, and began taking on water in 30-plus foot seas. The 144-foot fishing vessel was basically at the mercy of the sea at this point. Due to its location, both the US and Canadian Coast Guards were dispatched to the location. This was a grueling test to get these people off this vessel. There were 32 crew members on the vessel, and the only way the Coast Guard could really do this was hoist them all off one by one. This process took over 12 hours to get all the crew members off the vessel and onto various Canadian and US Coast Guard equipment. Due to the quick actions of both US and Canadian Coast Guard, everybody winds up surviving this event. Before evacuating the vessel, they were able to contain and extinguish the fire, but the ship would later succumb to the heavy seas anyway and wind up sinking out in the Atlantic. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening on your waterways, be sure to hit me up on Facebook or Instagram and let me know, and you might see your stories over here. Just like Picasso West did this week, and if you haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button. If not, we're coming to steal your drain plug.